We're going to talk about how to do rendering in Maya. So far, we've just basically done software rendering and or just showed our textures to give the illusion of light and rendering in Maya. Today we're going to use a third-party plugin called Mental Ray 2016 to achieve some realistic results. Now, in previous versions of Maya, Mental Ray was actually built in to the install file of Maya. For this version of Maya, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go to your Google and type Maya Mental Ray 2016. And you're going to go to the very first link that gives you. It's the autodeskknowledge.autodesk.com link. And you're going to download the appropriate install file for your Maya. Now, if you're using a PC, you'll use the .exe format. If you're using the Mental Ray for Mac, you'll use the .dmg format. Also, while you're here, it's a good idea to update your Maya and go ahead and click on this Maya Service Pack 6. The service packs are basically free updates, so you can go into here and then do the same thing. The DMG for the Macintosh computers, and then the EXE for the non-based Mac computers. So go ahead and download those if need be. And again, Mental Ray being the most important there as well, and then followed by the service pack is what I would do. All right, so I've already done that. Here I have a polygon shape. I have a picture. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a ground plane here to kind of give me a idea of some sort of floor or surface. So that's important. And we're going to kind of center it up. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my heads-up display for this one. I don't really need to know my poly count of this, mainly because I'm outputting this. Now, this method of rendering is simply for print, animation. It's not necessarily for real time. If you're creating video games, all the lights and rendering that you do in Maya tend to be a bit obsolete because when you pull everything into the game engine like Unity or Unreal, they will have their own lighting systems. All right, let's get started though. So we have our ground plane, and once you've installed your Mental Ray, make sure you boot Maya up again, like reboot it, and you're going to go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. Now this is important because Mental Ray will just not show up on its own. So once you download it, you go to this screen and you scroll all the way down until you find the Mental Ray Plugin tab, and it should say Maya to MR Bundle. If that tab is closed, simply open it up, and then you can do load and auto load. I like to do both because I use it quite frequently, and I hit close. Then you're good to go with that. All right, now that we have our items, let's play with Final Gather lighting. Now, Final Gather lighting is really, really nice. Imagine Final Gather similar to the atmosphere of the actual planet Earth. So if you think about it, on like a gray stormy day, everything has this gray kind of color cast to it outside, yet on a bright blue sky day, everything has a bright color cast to it. And that's simply what we're doing. We're going to use the background to manipulate what we see in the foreground. Now, we will build up upon this technique, and I will teach you how to take that background and take it one step further and use an actual image to work that out. All right, so let's get started here. Right now, I'm going to just use default shaders. I'm going to put my ambient occlusion on just because I think it looks good for demo sake purposes. And let's go ahead and let's do this. So I want you to navigate to the very top of your screen to this little cog and click on that. And here you see we have two tabs. We have a common tab and a Maya software tab. Well, Maya software is the default renderer for Maya. And where it's, it has its advantages, it's not exactly what we want to use for this output. So to change that tab, we're going to go to Render Using, and if you've activated Mental Ray in Windows Settings and Preferences Plugin Manager, you'll have a Mental Ray tab. So go ahead and click that on, and let's look at some of our options. Here in the Common tab stays the same, hence the name Common. We can name our file, we can set up an animation render for different frames if we have more than one frame. We can set the frame numbers, the range of the frames. We can change our renderable cameras, which we're going to discuss in a few seconds here. We can change the scale. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's change our scale to HD 1080. Let's make it, might as well make it high res. And now under the word render options, I want you guys to go ahead and I want you to uncheck the default light. And I have some weird scripts in here I'm going to take out for another process I was using. So now that I've enabled my default light, which is important that that's unchecked, I can move on to the next tab. Now this is the quality tab. One of the little secrets I use is I go to presets, load preset, and I use production. That's going to immediately give me some numbers that I typically wouldn't maybe have dealt with. Now what does this tab do? Well, this tab deals with sampling, so your anti-aliasing. This deals with the filtering of those anti-aliases, so kind of gauge and blur the edges. It deals with geometry and so forth. It also deals with indirect diffuse GI mode. GI means global illumination, and that's what we want to do here. We want to use essentially a dome to light our whole scene. If any of you are familiar with three-point lighting, typically there's three types of lights. Lights that are highlights, that show a color, or a bright shine on something. There are lights that cast shadows, which are referred to as key lights. And then there are lights that are called fill lights. And fill lights tend to cast an overall color to your whole scene, or overall illumination. So I'm going to go to indirect diffuse GI mode, and I'm going to turn it to final gather. And that's very important to turn that on. Otherwise, we won't get the effect that we're looking for. Now, if you're familiar with older versions of Maya, you still actually have your older versions and your older ways to change your different settings. Now, I've included a file in one of the modules that will really help you guys with this. So if you need to have specific numbers here, you can do that. All right, the next tab is the Scene tab. We're going to go into here, and then we're going to go to Image-Based Lighting. Though we're not using an image per se, this is a great fast way to kind of control our light output. So go ahead and hit Create. What you'll notice, let me zoom out here, is you actually get this yellow dome. This yellow dome is actually really, really nice. This is our light dome. So once you turn that on, you can actually close out of Mental Ray. And now we can start setting up this light dome. So it's very easy. If you want to select it, you just highlight the shell. And in your attribute editor, you're going to get something called a Mental Ray IBL shape. IBL stands for Image-Based Lighting. And we're going to use, instead of a picture, and that's in another lesson, we'll learn how to use pictures in this dome. Right now we're going to use a flat color. So we'll use, instead of an image file, we'll use a texture. And this texture, it could be really any picture texture, but we're going to use a flat color. So let's pick, in this case, let's shoot it out with white. So you can see the background thus has changed. All right, now that we have that white color, we need to set up our camera. Now we could guess and continually render until we find the right view, or we could use the tools that the Maya viewport provides us. So for instance, let's go to the little settings here on the viewport and find resolution gate. Resolution gate will open up, and not only will it show us the resolution of our render, but everything that's not grayed out will be how we see it in the final product. So here we can really play with this, and we can say, okay, maybe we want to show just the ground plane. So maybe we'll come at it from a top view like this. Maybe we want to just kind of set up our scene. Maybe let's offset it just slightly. There we go. All right. Now that you have this, you can actually go ahead and start rendering. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the very top of our screen and find the Render Current Frame button. Now the frame with the eyeball is often confused with Render Current Frame. The frame with the eyeball just simply opens your render view. And this allows you to change your renderer on the fly. It allows you to, again, render it like we did. It allows you to render regions. And it also allows you to save the images that you render. In addition, you can actually work with the exposure and the actual contrast and gamma gain of the scene. We can even change the color modes in which we wish to display the picture. So we have a lot of options in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit the render item right here, and let's see what we get. So what Final Gather is doing is taking the white dome, and it's essentially color casting a white, bright, it's not really a light because there's no shadows, but a white, bright glow to the whole scene. So it gives it the illusion of minor rendering. Now, this process does take a while depending on the complexity of your scene. I'm currently using a scene that has no actual textures in it yet, but we'll get to that when the time comes. All right, so let's do one by one, and you can see we have a pretty solid render. It's not lit, but we could go ahead and add lights to it as well. So at any point, if we want to darken this dome, we could just grab the dome and darken the color as so. We can actually even emit light from that dome to cause shadows. So let's go ahead and check the emit light, and let's see what we get now. So that last render was 26 seconds. As soon as I hit the emit light, you're going to notice it's probably going to double in time. It depends on the RAM and the processing speeds of your computer. But what you can see is that there are a bit more shadows when we check that emit light button. To me, the most apparent is actually in the base or in the picture itself. So we're going to go through a process where it's going to look pretty gnarly at first, and the more we use and the more we emit, the smoother it will get. Now, the reason you see these dots and these speckles, these are essentially it processing the light right away. Here's the final output. I still have way too many speckles here. What's happening is the settings that we have used as default, remember I just turned on Final Gather, I didn't adjust the settings. They're not powerful enough to smooth out and to calculate where this light and such is bouncing. So that's why you're getting that. Now, if I hit escape, I just tap it once, it will eventually cut off. You can see that's only 1 minute and 4 in, and we've only really rendered a bit. Now, obviously I could tell this wasn't going to turn out the way I wanted it. So I would kind of save the emit light until you have a picture in the background. Remember, you can always go and add or create lights of your choice. For instance, we could add a simple point light. We'll hit 7 on our keyboard, hit W to move the point light up. And if we pull that point light up, and Mental Ray is a ray trace based engine, so we can go to the Shadows tab of that light and turn on ray trace and then render out something that will actually hopefully have a shadow. And so absolutely, you can see the shadow right there. The shadow is going to need some work, but we can definitely get a starting point of something very nice. So this is the basic kind of breakdown of Final Gather lighting. Some people call it clay rendering because it kind of looks like everything's in clay. What I typically use it for is if I'm doing any product placements. So if you're ever doing any graphic design where you have to do a 3D model, I utilize shaders in Maya, such as if I go to my hypergraph, or pardon me, my hypershade right here, I can go ahead and grab materials such as Mental Ray materials. Here's one called Mental Ray Material X, and I really like this one. I'm going to middle click and drag it onto my scene, and I'm going to make 2 of those actually. We'll put one on our base just to show you the coolness of it. These have presets in them, so we can do something like if we want the base to be copper or glazed ceramic even. So maybe we'll change that to some sort of maybe like a lighter burnt umber, kind of a clay feel. And for our floor, we'll go ahead and make it completely white. And for the reflections, this is where it gets really cool. We can actually change up some of our reflectivity in order to kind of have a nice product placement render. Like, let's see what this does, and I think you'll be very impressed actually on the final result. So the more advanced shaders we use, the more advanced renders we're going to get. And I actually forgot to take the light out of there, so I'm going to have some weird shadows going on. But what you can see is we start to get nicer renders. So let me hit escape here, because I really don't want that light in there. I'm going to take that out, so I just highlight the light and hit delete, and I hit 6 on my keyboard so I can still see. I want my background to be white, just like the foreground and the floor and all that. And let's go ahead and run the render now. We're going to get a nice blurred reflection, which is actually pretty close to reality when it comes to reflections. And more importantly, look at the seamless nature of this render now. We didn't really need that light in there. the reflection does well enough. This is, again, great. This is the equivalent of if you have a white box where you put a piece of sculpture or artwork in and it has all white sides and you take a picture in it. This is the Maya equivalent of that. So this is really great for rendering out images for maybe model sheets, which we're going to do down the road, or just presenting your artwork for a client or a future potential employer. So we'll give this a few seconds to clean up. It should be off to the ends of the render here. What it's doing now is it's kind of cleaning up some of these aliasing here. So if I hit one by one, you can see it cleans it up. But look at that nice render. Great highlights. We didn't use any background. Again, if you're interested in that shader, that material, so if I go to assign new material here, is only available in Mentor. It's called the MIA Material X shader. So play with those. Those are really, really fun to use. All right, that's all for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll actually incorporate an image in the background so that we can add to this and make it more realistic.